Okay, well, it's 7:32, so I guess we'll get going here. So, welcome to What's Up Over Edmonton for the month of June 2023. My name is Jeff Robertson, and I am a member of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada, Edmonton Centre. And this is a view of our observatory in Coronation Park, just at sunset, some of our telescopes. I call this What's Up Over Edmonton because the skies over Edmonton are quite a bit different than what you typically find in astronomy publications like Sky and Telescope and Astronomy. For example, this is the sky in Toronto on July the 5th at 11 o'clock. And I always point out this constellation here, Scorpio, the Scorpion. It's completely above the horizon. We're in Edmonton at the same time, on the same date. This is all we ever get to see of Scorpio. It never gets completely above the horizon. And it's not only what we see, but how we see it. For example, this is a picture I took back in February of the moon up here, Jupiter in the middle, and Venus at the bottom. You'll notice they're in an angle. And on that same night, my sister's cousin took this picture in Buceraeus, and the same three objects are almost in a straight line down to the horizon. So we do see things quite a bit different. And I happened to notice in the June issue of Astronomy magazine, in their constellation section, they were talking about a constellation named Era. And I looked at that and I said, I've never heard of it. Well, it's a constellation below Scorpio, so you'd have to be down in the southern US or in Mexico to see it. So I glanced through it really quick because I'm not going to see it anyway. So most of the information I use comes out of the Observer's Handbook. I also use astronomy publications like Astronomy. Used to use the Dear and Departed Sky News, but that is since gone. The Observer's Handbook is a great resource. It's 352 pages of just about anything you'd want to know for the amateur astronomer. So what do we got in June? We've got long days, short nights, and throughout a lot of May, we had a lot of smoke. Hopefully the smoke stays away in June. We'll see. So we got Venus beginning its exit from the evening sky. It's been hanging around fairly high up for a couple months now, but it's going to start its exit. We've got giant planets before dawn. We've got the noctilucent clouds. This is prime season for noctilucent clouds. And we also have the summer solstice on June the 21st. Now, before I start the planetarium portion, I have to apologize. I like to keep it about 15, maybe 18 minutes. I went way over this time. I even ended up cutting out a lot of I cut out a whole section because I think, oh my God, this thing's going to be half an hour long if I don't do that. So I do apologize. It is a bit long, but here we go. Let's look at what we can see in the skies over Edmonton for the month of June 2023. And as always, we'll start with the sunrise and sunset times. On June the 1st, the sun will rise at 5:11 a.m. It will set at 9:52 p.m. for 16 hours and 41 minutes where the sun is above the horizon. On the 30th of June, the sun will rise at 5:08. It will set at 10:06 for 16 hours and 58 minutes where the sun is above the horizon. And you may have noticed that I did not mention when astronomical twilight ends and the sky gets completely dark, because all through the month of June and July, we are locked in perpetual astronomical twilight. The sky never gets completely dark in Edmonton in these 2 months. Let's start with the evening planets, and we'll start with Venus, which is blazing bright in the west-northwest after sunset. Venus reaches its greatest eastern elongation, that is its greatest distance from the sun, on June the 4th. And if you look at it through a telescope, it will present a half phase. similar to this view here. Now, Venus has been riding fairly high in the western sky after sunset since about the middle of March. And all through May, it was setting after 1 a.m. in the morning. But that's about to change. For example, on June the 1st, it's going to set at 1:19. But by the end of the month, on July the 4th, which is the day before we have the next What's Up, it's setting at 11:45. And as dusk falls, you can watch Venus appear lower and lower in the sky each evening. And we'll just run a little simulation here. Now, this time is set at 11:30. So if we watch Venus through the month, it gets progressively lower and lower and lower. And by July the 4th, the day before the next What's Up, at 11:30, it is just above the horizon. And as this drawing shows, Venus will sink fairly rapidly. By the middle of July, it's going to be really low on the horizon when the sun goes down, and it will reach inferior conjunction. That is, it will pass between the Earth and the sun on August the 13th and then reemerge into the morning sky. Moving on to Mars, it's a shadow of what it was a few months ago when it was at opposition. It is very faint, traveling between the constellation Gemini and Cancer. Shines at a magnitude 1.58 at the beginning of the month and fades as we pull further and further away. Now, through a telescope, you will be able to make out a orangey disk. I doubt you'll be able to see any sort of surface features. Now, at the beginning of the month, Mars is traveling through the Beehive cluster. Now, this happens in the dusk sky, so it might be a tough target to see, but give it a go. Here it is on the first, and here it is on the second, and on the third it has cleared the Beehive cluster. At the beginning of the month, Mars sets at 1:34. By the end of the month, it sets at midnight. Mars will be hanging around in the evening sky for a few more months yet. It actually doesn't reach superior conjunction, that is where it swings behind the sun from our point of view, until November. Before we leave the evening sky, let us point out the dwarf planet Ceres, which is in the constellation Leo, and it is just off the hind end of the Lion, the star Denobula. It shines at a magnitude 7.18, and it is visible in a small telescope or a good pair of steadily held binoculars. Switching to the morning sky, this is where we have to go to see the giant outer planets, and we'll start with Saturn. At the beginning of the month, it is rising at 2:26 in the morning, and by the end of the month, it will be rising at 12:17. So it is starting to move into the evening sky. Through a telescope, Saturn is a lovely object. Now the rings are starting to close up, and it does this as it orbits the sun. The rings open and close from our point of view. So the rings are starting to close up after putting on a really good display. But still, in a telescope, the rings of Saturn are always a delight to see, especially for someone who's never seen them. Okay, moving on to Neptune. Neptune shines with a magnitude of 7.88, which means you'll need a telescope. And you can make it out in binoculars if you know where to look. There are finder's charts on heavens above that'll give you its location from day to day. And in a telescope, Neptune will present this pale blue disk, and you might even be able to make out its big moon Triton. And as we move out from Neptune, let's go over to Jupiter. At the beginning of the month, Jupiter is rising at 3:53, but by the end of the month, it is rising at 1:55. So it is starting to move into the evening sky too. And Jupiter will be well placed through the fall and winter months, it will be fairly high up in the sky and easy to observe, and you can watch the dance of its many moons as they circle the planet. The four big Galilean moons, Callisto, Europa, Ganymede, and Io. Now I had the daylight option turned off in that last view, so here's Jupiter at the beginning of the month. This is at 4:15, about 45 minutes before the sun comes up. And by the end of the month, it is quite a bit higher in the sky and easier to observe. So looking for Jupiter at the beginning of the month could be problematic, but certainly by the end of the month, Jupiter is well placed for viewing if you want to get up at 4 in the morning or so. And finally, we'll move to Uranus. And here's Uranus 45 minutes before the sun comes up on the 30th of June. And it is well up. And it's not centered. Here we go. And if you looked at Uranus through a telescope, you would see this pale blue disk. You might make out some of Uranus's moons, but they're quite faint and very difficult to see in an amateur telescope. But it can be done. But to see Uranus, you would have to wait till the end of the month. This is Uranus at the beginning of the month, 45 minutes before the sun comes up, and it is still below the horizon from Edmonton. So Uranus is a target, but you have to wait till the end of June and into July to see it. So I moved the time to half an hour before the sun comes up for June the 1st, and we'll page through a few days in the month for Mercury. Now Mercury hangs very low. There it is there popping up on the 9th. It never gets very high up. By the 15th, it's pretty much as high as it's going to get from Edmonton. And then it sinks below the horizon by the 24th. Now, if you have a go-to telescope and you can get it aligned before the sun comes up, you can actually follow Mercury. And it is possible to see Mercury in the daytime. I've seen it lots of times. And like Venus, Mercury goes through phases, and they change quite rapidly from day to day. The thing about Mercury is you have to be very careful because it is so close to the sun. You do not want to point your telescope at the sun without a proper solar shield. But if you have the right equipment, you can view Mercury in the daytime, and you can watch it go through its phases. If we follow the moon to the month, on the 9th, it is near the planet Saturn, passing it on the 10th. And on the 10th, it is between Neptune and Saturn and makes kind of a nice triangle in the sky. On the 11th, it's near Neptune. And on the 14th, it is near Jupiter. The moon is new on the 18th and then moves into the evening sky. And on the 21st, the day of the summer solstice, it is near Venus and Mars, making kind of a triangle in the sky between Mars, the moon, and Venus. And speaking of the solstice, that does happen on the 21st of June. It marks the official start of summer in the northern hemisphere, and it is the day we get the most hours of daylight. On that particular day, it's 17 hours and 2 minutes where the sun is above the horizon. It's where the sun rises at its furthest point north in the eastern sky and sets at its furthest point north in the western sky. It rises at 5:04 a.m., sets at 10:07. And this occurs because the Earth is tilted at 23.5 degrees on its axis, and it is the day the northern hemisphere has its greatest tilt toward the sun. And of course, in the southern hemisphere, it marks the beginning of winter. And this is a picture taken by one of our club members, Luca Vanzella, one of his projects, showing the sunset path through a full year. And you can see on the left the sun setting on the southwest, and that is in winter. And on the right-hand portion of the picture, the sun setting in the northwest, and that is the beginning of summer here in Edmonton. And speaking of sunrises and sunsets, let's talk about the sun. The sun has been very active lately as it heads toward what we call solar max. The sun goes through an 11-year cycle where sunspot activity and flares, etc., increase and then decrease. You can view the sun safely using a special solar filter. You can buy these at astronomy supply stores. Use only solar filter material. Don't try and use potato chip bags or gift wrap or something like that. Another thing you can do to watch the sun is with a number 14 welder's glass. That will protect your eyes and shield it from solar radiation so you do not unintentionally blind yourself. For telescopes, you can buy ready-made solar filters. I have one for my 8-inch. Or you can make one. This is some photos of a solar filter I made using approved solar filter material. I took a temporary pipe cap, which I bought at Home Depot for just a few bucks, and used a math set, geometry set compass to etch a circle, and then carved out the plastic cap with a scribing tool. And then bought some nylon screws from Home Depot, drilled some holes in the sides, and secured it to a 90 millimeter telescope that I have. I took it down to the U.S. in 2017 for the solar eclipse, and it worked quite well. These type of filters that fit over the end of your telescope are known as white light filters, even though the image you see may not be white. Depends on the filter material. And what these do is screen out 99.999% of the light reaching your eye. And these images I'm showing are what you're going to see when you look through a telescope with a white light filter. This one here is one I took of the transit of Venus in 2012. If you missed it, the next one is in 2117. Now, there is another type of telescope amateurs use, and it is known as a hydrogen alpha telescope. These are a special type of telescope that are only for looking at the sun. And they allow light to come through in the hydrogen alpha spectrum. This is light that our eyes can't see, but they allow us to see all sorts of detail on the sun, including prominences along the edge and lines on the sun, which we call filaments. What filaments are actually prominences viewed from above. And these last three hydrogen alpha images were taken by one of our members, Richard Covey, who is a very good astrophotographer. Now, I have to say, I do own a hydrogen alpha telescope. It's a little 40 millimeter solar telescope put out by Coronado. And there it is there in the foreground with somebody looking through it. And there's my 8-inch behind it with the white light filters affixed to it. And of course, as I mentioned last month, perpetual twilight time through the middle of May through June and July is the time to see noctilucent clouds. This is the result of sunlight shining on particles very high up in the atmosphere, about 80 kilometers. While we're in darkness, up high, the sun is still shining on these particles, and they produce these electric blue clouds. And these are a few pictures. Looking at some of the stuff we can see in the night sky in June. So I've set the time here for 12:30 in the morning. So starting in the west, we see the harbinger of spring, Leo, is about to set. Behind it, the constellation Virgo, with its plethora of galaxies. Moving along into the southern sky, and the heart of the Milky Way is visible. Now, in the city, you're not going to be able to see the Milky Way. You've got to get out of town on a night when the moon isn't in the sky. Now, there are all sorts of targets in the constellation Sagittarius, as you see it listed here. The Trifid Nebula, the Lagoon Nebula, the Eagle Nebula, made famous by the Hubble Pillars of Creation photograph that came out some decades ago. So if you do get out of town and go south, and you can observe some of these targets. Some of them, of course, you're not going to be able to see because of perpetual twilight. But if you go a little bit further south, the sky will get a little bit darker, even if you go to Calgary. If we follow the Milky Way upward, we come to Cygnus the Swan, right here, also known as the Northern Cross. In the Northern Cree, it's called Niska the Goose. And the tail of Cygnus the Swan, this star here, Deneb, forms one of the corners of the summer triangle with the bright star Vega and then Altair. Now we have a bit of news. Let's swing over here to Ursa Major here, or the Big Dipper, and head to M101, the Pinwheel Galaxy. There was a supernova there a few days ago, and there was a supernova explosion in M101. And one of our members managed to put together a little video of a previous image he took of M101 and then one with the supernova. And you can see that here with the supernova blinking on and off. Now, a few of our people were out at Coronation Park on Friday the 26th doing some observations. Now, Coronation Park is fairly light polluted, but some people who pointed their scopes toward M101, although they could not see the galaxy because of the light pollution, they could make out the supernova, which is really cool. Like I say, a supernova can be as bright as an entire galaxy, or in this case, even brighter. And while we're looking almost straight up, let us follow the arc of the handle of the Big Dipper, or the tail of the Great Bear, down to the very bright star Arcturus. It is the brightest star in the summer sky, and it is easily seen after dusk. And if you go further in an almost straight line down from Arcturus, you spike down to the bright star Spica in the constellation Virgo. And if we go back up again, another highlight of the summer and fall sky is M13, the great globular cluster in the constellation Hercules. And it's pretty easy to find. You find the keystone asterism. There it is there. And it is in between these two stars of the keystone. And going back to Cygnus, if we flip it around here and keep following the Milky Way as it heads into the north, come to Cassiopeia, Lady in the Chair, or a celestial W. And it's home to one of my favorite objects that I like to show at public events, the Owl Cluster, NGC 457, because it actually kind of looks like an owl. So I think that's about it, and we'll conclude this section and move on and see if there are any questions or comments. Okay, so as I said, I had to cut out a lot of that because it was going way too long, so it was a bit choppy. Are there any questions, comments? Rotten Tomato. Oh, I see some chats. Let's see here. Bears don't have tails. Yeah, well, there's a story where they got nipped off by a lion in one of them. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Yes, you're right. I did say the surface, but I did mean the atmosphere. Yeah, and I also had the wrong slide for the sunset time for the end of the month too. So sorry about that. Alistair, you got anything to add, or seeing you were one of the guys out that spotted the supernova from Coronation Park?
All I can say at this point is, do come on out to the observatory when it is open on the weekends, and I'm sure they'll line it up for you. We have finder charts for it. And I also got C series the other night too, so that was
Oh, good.
nice. So
Oh, I don't know what the final magnitude was for the supernova. I'm sorry, I don't know that.
oh, it's about 10.6. I don't know if that's its max brightness, but it's got to be pretty close to that. 10.6, 10.7. Yeah, so easily visible in an 8-inch scope, even in twilight, even in the city. So yeah, it's pretty good for that.
Okay. Well, if there's nothing else, we'll move on to the moon.
What do you see when you look at the moon? When it's full and round, do you see a balloon? Does it look like a cookie with the bite taken out? What do you see when you look at the moon? It follows a path every month of the year.
Okay, the moon is full on June the 3rd, and the full moon in June is known as the strawberry moon. It's also the berries ripen moon, the green corn moon, the hot moon, the mead moon, the horse moon, the rose moon, or the honeymoon. It's got a lot of names for June. Third quarter is on June the 10th. The moon is new on the 17th. And first quarter is on the 26th. Features of the moon I take either out of the Observe the Moon certificate for either binoculars or telescope put out by the RASC. And the feature today is from the telescope certificate program. And it is the crater Borealis. And there it is there. It's in shadow. This is one of the pictures I took. And there it is there. It's the most prominent crater in Mare Nubium, or the Sea of Clouds, in the southwest quadrant of the moon. And it is found below the more prominent crater Copernicus. It's best seen 10 to 11 days after new moon. The crater is 61 kilometers wide and 3.5 kilometers deep. And this is a picture with similar lighting to my photo, but taken by someone who's much better at photography than I am. The floor of the crater is rough, with low rises and a complex central peak system. The central peak system rises about 2.4 kilometers above the floor. It's got terraced walls, and it shows signs of landslides or moonslides, I guess. It was formed somewhere between 3.2 and 1.1 billion years ago. And this is a unique view taken from Apollo 16, taken from the side, and you can see the crater with its central peak and that. It was named after Ismail Borealis, who was a 17th century French astronomer and also a mathematician. He was an early defender of the ideas of Copernicus, Kepler, and Galileo. And he was called the most noted astronomer of the generation at the time. So that is our feature on the moon. Now, every month in the opening, I use this constellation, Scorpio, as an example of the differences in what we can see in our skies compared to what's found in popular astronomy publications and what is heard and seen in the media, particularly that night sky guy that pops up on CBC radio all the time. The constellation has lots of interesting objects within its boundaries, but only a few that we can see well from our latitude. So this is our view of Scorpio, and it's best seen in the evening during the summer months. And it's found along the ecliptic between the constellation Libra, the scales here, and Ophiuchus up here, the serpent bearer. And if you read the horoscope page, and I'd be really disappointed if you did, you might say, oh, isn't it between Libra and Sagittarius? Oh, yeah, okay. If I remove the horizon, this is the whole constellation. So you have to travel south quite a ways so you can see the whole constellation. I've seen the whole constellation, but I was in southern Ontario to do that. And it's also one of the constellations that looks like what its name implies. Unlike Aries, the ram, which looks to be more like a hockey stick, this thing actually looks like a scorpion. Now, when I was young, I was very scared of scorpions, not because scorpions are found in Edmonton, but stories I heard my dad tell me. During the war, prior to the invasion of Sicily and Italy, my dad's outfit was stationed in North Africa, and I heard my dad telling his buddies about having to shake out his boots every morning in case scorpions crawled into them during the night. And sometimes soldiers would let out a god-awful scream because they didn't shake out their boots and they'd just been stung. But I'm digressing here. In Edmonton, we don't get the stinger. We just get the claws. In the region of the constellation, we can see, we'll look at the brightest star in the constellation, which is Antares, and two globular clusters, M4 and M80. There are other ones you can see further down, but I'm picking these because they're fairly high up from our latitude. The brightest star in the constellation is Antares, often referred to as the heart of the scorpion. Antares is Greek for rival of Ares. The god of war in the Greek mythology was Ares. The god of war in the Roman mythology is Mars. So it's rival of Ares or rival of Mars due to a similar red color. Antares is a red supergiant star. It's about 550 light years away, having a mass of 12 times that of our own sun. And it's exhausted the hydrogen in its core, and it's now burning helium, and is swollen to 600 million kilometers in diameter. Or to put it another way, if it replaced our sun, it would extend out between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter. It's an irregular variable star, and then the magnitude oscillates between 0.6 and 1.6. And as a high mass star, it will sometime in the future deplete its fuel in its core, collapse and explode as a supernova, and it will be a very spectacular one seen from Earth. Messier 4 is a globular cluster approximately 7,200 light years away, which is quite close for globular clusters. Most of them are along the edge of the galaxy, like 25,000 light years away. So this one's fairly close. It has an apparent magnitude of 5.9 and is located 2.25 full moon diameters from Antares, and you can see Antares off to the left in this photograph. It can be seen in binoculars or a small telescope. It was the first globular cluster discovered in which individual stars could be resolved, and the estimated age of the cluster is around 12.2 billion years. And finally, Messier 80 is a globular cluster cataloged by Charles Messier in 1781, and it has an apparent magnitude of 7.87 and is approximately 32,600 light years from Earth. M80 is about 95 light years in diameter and contains hundreds of thousands of stars, and it's one of the most densely populated clusters in our galaxy, and it is visible in moderate-sized amateur telescopes. And that is another view of it. In Greek mythology, there were several myths associated with Scorpio, and a lot of them involve Orion. And according to one version, Orion boasted to the goddess Artemis and her mother Leto that he would kill every animal on Earth. And Artemis and Leto sent a scorpion to kill Orion, which it succeeded in doing. Zeus raised both combatants to the sky to serve as a reminder to mortals to curb their excessive pride. And they are in opposite parts of the sky, Scorpio in the summer, Orion in the winter, so that they will never meet. In Polynesia, Scorpios tail represents a fish hook with some stories describing it as the magic fish hook used by the demigod Maui to pull up land from the ocean floor that became the Hawaiian Islands. And if you ever saw the film Moana, Maui and his magic fish hook were key components of the plot. Okay, we'll go on to space history. So space history is where we look at a past event that not only occurred this month, but whose anniversary year is divisible by 5. So in 2023, it's events that occurred in years ending in 3 or 8. The end of this month, as of the end of this month, 77 females have flown in space, and today it's rather routine. But 60 years ago, in June of 1963, the first female flew in space, and that was Valentina Tereshkova aboard Vostok 6, which was also the last mission of the Vostok program, which was the Soviet Union's first crewed spacecraft. Vostok was a two-piece craft with a spherical crew cabin and a conical instrument module, which contained the retro rocket and the bulk of the consumables for the flight. I did talk about Vostok in a lot more detail back in 2021 when I talked about Yuri Gagarin and his first flight. Valentina Tereshkova was an amateur parachutist and textile worker and had been interested in aviation for quite a while. She made her first parachute jump at the age of 22 in 1959. When the Soviet Union was looking for female cosmonauts, they had to be young, brave, physically strong, with aviation experience, and able to be trained for spaceflight in less than 6 months. The first step in the training of the female candidates was basic flight school, and when that was done, they were commissioned as junior lieutenants in the Soviet Air Force. There were several thousand applicants, but from those several thousand, only 5 female candidates were chosen. Tereshkova was selected for this mission, not just because of her performance in training, but because she had the right background that the Soviets wanted to present to the world. She grew up working on a farm. She currently worked in a textile factory and was single with a good work ethic. Tereshkova was to fly Vostok 6 as a joint mission with Vostok 5. Vostok 5 was to be commanded by this guy, Valery Bukowski. Vostok 5 lifted off on June the 14th for a planned 8-day mission, which was going to be the longest spaceflight at the time. And in a somewhat uncharacteristic move for the times, because the Soviets were very secretive, they let it be known that a second flight with a woman would be imminent. It's a picture from the Detroit News. Tereshkova in Vostok 6 took off on June 16th, 1963. The launch was normal, and on her first orbit, she came within 5 kilometers of Vostok 5. On her first orbit, the Soviets trumpeted this as a rendezvous in space. But Vostok spacecraft lacked the ability to maneuver in orbit. They could change their attitude, but they couldn't change their orbits. It was rather a case of a good launch trajectory that got them within 5 kilometers and nothing to do with the control of the spacecraft itself. Direct communication between Vostok 5 and 6 was impossible after the first day of the flights as the spacecraft drifted apart. The primary goal of Vostok 6 was to investigate the effects of zero-G on the female body, as well as operations between 2 spacecraft in orbit. And Soviet space television broadcast live videos of Tereshkova from a camera inside the spacecraft, and she also conversed with Premier Nikita Khrushchev over the radio. Took several video recordings of forests and streams passing below her spacecraft. She did throw up once after eating a particularly dry piece of bread. But that wasn't the only problem. On her first day in orbit, and this is where her training paid off, she noticed a problem with the orientation of the spacecraft. Vostok's were pretty much fully automated with little or no input from the cosmonaut. So had she not noticed this, if the retro rocket had fired as intended, instead of coming back to Earth, she would have been sent into a higher orbit where her life support would have been depleted before the spacecraft's orbit decayed. Luckily, the problem was fixed, and the deorbit on the third day of the flight was normal. On June 19th, Vostok 6 fired its retro rocket, re-entered the Earth's atmosphere. And as with all previous Vostok missions, the pilot ejected and landed on their own parachute. Due to increased solar flare activity, Vostok 5 did not fly for 8 days. It returned on June the 19th, the same day. Now, this marked the end of the Vostok program, but the spacecraft design soldiered on for many years, well into the 80s, actually, many times being repurposed as a spy satellite. They would load it up with cameras, fly it over an area, take some pictures, and then bring the reentry sphere back and see what they got. The twin flights of Vostok 5 and 6, particularly the talk of the rendezvous, caused a flurry of speculation in the U.S. about how far the USSR was ahead of them in the space race. And if NASA had female astronauts, which they didn't, I wonder what the discussion would have been like.
Who will be the second woman in space? I mean, who's going to be the first free woman to space, huh? We know it's going to be.
I couldn't resist with that. Tereshkova received a hero's welcome in Moscow and went on a world publicity tour, but never flew in space again. In fact, the Soviets didn't fly another female cosmonaut for 19 years. So it was clearly more of a publicity stunt than anything else. Up to now, 6 Russian/Soviet women have flown in space. 5 of them were cosmonauts. One of them was an actress who filmed part of a movie aboard the ISS. 60 females from NASA have flown in space, starting with Sally Ride on June the 18th, 1983, 40 years ago this month, on STS-7 Space Shuttle Challenger. And with that, I will say Heavens Above is a great source of all things astronomical. You can print star charts, you could print finder charts, you can check satellite passes, if there's any comets in the sky, supernovas. Let's check it out, Heavens Above. Our next What's Up is going to be on Wednesday, July the 5th at 7:30. The next, and this is the final meeting of the RASC Edmonton before the summer break, is on Monday, June the 12th at 7:30. You can join us in the Ziegler Star Theater in the TELUS World of Science, or watch it online on Zoom. Links will be on our webpage. And with that, I will say thank you. And are there any questions?
I do have an interesting event to note coming up with the full moon. Some of you know that Luca Vanzella and I have embarked on this long moonrise project, and one of the things that's happening for the June full moons for the next 2 or 3 or 4 years is that it occurs when the moon is at its maximum below the ecliptic. So the full moon rides super, super low in the Edmonton sky. The lowest it's going to be for the next 3 years is the lowest. And then we'll have to wait another 18 years later to get another one, another set. But what's actually cool about that is that the usual phrase, full moon rises at sunset, and sets at sunrise. But the rise at sunset, because it's opposite the sun, the full moon, except now it's because it's so far below the ecliptic, it doesn't rise until much later, and in fact doesn't even rise until after midnight, the full moon. Quite a long time after, and then it sets at 4 a.m. or something, sort of equally ridiculous. But a very, very low trajectory, so it will be nice and yellow. The other thing I was going to mention is that some of you are aware that Berta Beltran and I are running the casual in-town astronomy gathering for observing, and we had our last one Friday night. We're aiming for Friday or Saturday nights, but it looks like the weather is not going to be conducive this weekend. But hang in there. If we're lucky, it'll clear out early enough Saturday night. So look for announcements on Facebook.
Thanks, Alistair. Where are you guys setting up for your full moon pictures?
For the full moon, we go to Valley View.
Oh, okay.
Valley View Drive,
Yep.
just east of 142nd Street, and just a beautiful, from all the way northeast to southeast. Not quite 180-degree horizon from there, but almost. So yeah, that's where we shoot from.
And see one of Daryl Cates's houses.
Yes. Oh, does he have several?
Well, he spends most of his time in the States, so yeah. Okay. Well, thanks. Yeah, well, hopefully it'll be nice on Saturday. I'll see you guys there. Oh, my old hood. Yeah, right, Tom. One of those Parkview guys.
Yep. Valley View boy.
Yeah. I was a Crestwood guy, so
Uh-huh.
yeah, it was like Edmonton, Calgary. It was Crestwood, Parkview. Kind of hated each other, but didn't know why.
We didn't even want to talk about Laurier, so
Oh no, we don't talk about those people.
West Side Story all over again.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Oh, what do we got? A couple chats here. Oh, yeah. You're welcome. Thanks. Thanks, Jane.
I was wondering, is it my imagination or are astronomy magazines disappearing off the shelf rapidly or not even coming out anymore?
Sky News is gone,
Yeah.
but astronomy's still up, you know.
Mhm. Yep.
I
Because I've been
mean,
looking around for a couple months now and I can't find an astronomy magazine
really?
in any of the like drugstores or.
Oh, okay. Well, Chapters has them. They have both. They have Astronomy, Sky and Telescope, and the Sky at Night, which is from England, but it's always like a couple months late by the time it gets over here. But I pick mine up either at Chapters or at the Safeway at Terralosa. They always have them there.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think astronomy publishing in general is kind of been threatened. I know Whitman Bell, I think, went under, and Sky and Telescope rescued, the Annals of the Deep Sky series and has started to put them out. The most recent edition came out. It's all about the Magellanic Clouds. But yeah, I think just publishing in general probably is in peril.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely they've been getting thinner, and it's unfortunately a vicious circle of decreasing revenues for advertising, less pages printed, and then it.
Yeah, I
goes
guess
down.
it's like that for everything. I mean, look at the newspaper. I still get the newspaper, and it's more like a flyer sometimes, very thin.
Yeah, there is a Canadian electronic magazine. I've forgotten offhand what it's called, but it was promoted on the Actual Astronomy podcast lately. But but it's essentially it was it's run by the most recent editor of Sky News, who's still trying to, I guess, make a name for herself in astronomy and science publishing or journalism. And so there's like Alan Dyer contributes to it, and essentially the same gang of people who wrote for Sky News also supports this magazine.
Is it a subscription base, I presume? Because they got to make some money to pay these guys, right?
No, I think it's just go to it, and there's of course advertisements on the side. But it's out there. I'll see if I can find it and post it.
Okay. All right. If there's anything else.
Oh, good job, Jeff. Appreciate
thanks,
it.
Thanks, Tom. This has been recorded. I will edit out the goofs and etc. I might fix that first slide there with the wrong time on it too. So, and post it in a day or two. The fancy opening title. Well, not that fancy. And okay. Well, thanks
All
very
right.
much. And
Thank you.
we'll hopefully we'll see you all next month or at
Good
our
twilight,
meeting on the
everybody.
12th. Yeah.
Thanks, Jeff.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.